Toward the games, Brisbane 2032, Luttsy and Chris Jones. Nothing to report this week. We'll see you next time. Not quite. It's been a little hectic. Jonesy, how are you, mate?
Oh, I'm very well, Luttsy.
No, you're not.
I'm a little bit angry.
You are?
I see it's an appropriate shirt you've got on there today, Luttsy. It's the black T-shirt just with 4 letters in white on the front, WTAF. I think that sort of captures the mood of the Olympic and Paralympic city. Luttsy, Can I start today by quoting you?
You can, mate.
Be okay?
Are you going to give any, why I was talking about this? Should we, just in case people are coming in late on this?
I think that I'll just go with it and we can fill in the blanks in a minute.
I feel like if you're listening right now, you know what's happened over the
This is David Michael Luttrell.
Yeah. On Instagram.
Do you want to, at Luttsy?
At Luttsy,
yeah, okay.
L-U-T-T-S-Y.
I can't even process today's latest announcement that Nathan, the suburb of Nathan, will host the 2032 Olympic Athletics. After travelling the world, you write, the last few years, witnessing firsthand how towns and cities have showcased brilliant events in innovative, thoughtful and inspiring sporting arenas, it's cringe at best and completely humiliating at worst that short-term politics wins out, driven by people with almost no sporting or event acumen directly impacting us all, and that brilliant local people across a broad spectrum of industries and skill sets will be denied the opportunity to showcase their talents to the world. Well, that devastates me. To what end, you write, David Michael Luttrell?
To what end? Thank you, Christopher. I sat there yesterday. I was in my lounge room. I know you were at work, infuriated at the announcement that...
I was. I taught myself a few new swear words yesterday, Luttsy.
Yeah. Yes. To that end, again... Government and politics and short-term politics has won out. Maybe with the exception of one man. You know who I'd love dearly in a perfect world to talk to today?
Who's that, Luttsy?
Graham Quirk.
Why is that?
The former Lord Mayor and chair of the Sport Venue Review. The man that we've had on this is a repeat offender on this podcast. Mm-hmm. Well, is he? No, he's not yet. About to be. Because...
Don't give it away. It's going so well.
Because for the first time, I could see clearly now in whatever's happening with this Olympic show.
You can see clearly now the gabba's gone.
And I could see it for 4 hours. And then a cold front rained over us again. And our dreams were swept from under our feet. But Graham Quirk, I would love to have a chat with...
Oh, who's that sitting right next to you?
Graham Quirk is sitting right next to us. Graham, welcome again.
The people you meet.
Welcome again. Welcome again to
Thank you, Luttsy.
Toward the games. An opening question. How do you feel, Graham, that even though 27 of your 30 recommendations were upheld, I guess, by the government, that potentially the biggest was completely ignored and, if anything, maybe even defied?
Well, in life you can never let things get you too far down. But we did a report. We were engaged to do it. We were grateful for the engagement, and we did it in good faith. And we were out there seeking the fit for purpose venues that could be delivered. And most importantly, in the panel's view, value for money and community legacy. Not just legacy for sport, but community legacy. And that drove every single recommendation that we made in the report. Luttsy?
Yeah, and that's essentially, for the first time again, I feel like we'd made some forward progress in reaching all those key areas, without going like legacy and also showcasing, on every level, showcasing great events and what will be a magnificent time in 2032, but also legacy, also community, all those things. For the first time, I read that report, and even leading up to the report, I was getting word that we're actually building towards something here. We're going to be able to start breaking turf on this and actually start moving forward. And then I feel like it just all of a sudden... it was 4 hours after the release of your report that somehow, Cabinet had met, Jonesy?
Yes, so...
And already decided within 4 hours that, we don't agree with that.
It's actually even worse than that, Luttsy. The Premier Steven Miles revealed after that Cabinet meeting yesterday that he had in recent weeks, and I'm doing air hooks, got wind of the fact that Mr. Quirk's review was going to recommend, as it did, a stadium on the greenfield side at Victoria Park be built instead of the Gabba at essentially the same cost as the Gabba was going to cost, because it was going to cost more than the $2.7 billion that the government had been claiming. The Premier got wind of this and decided, well, I don't really like the way that the review that I've spent $500,000 establishing and getting some experts involved in is going. I'd like to do something else. So then he went to his public servants and said, how about we hold the athletics at the site of the 1982 Commonwealth Games, the old QE2 Stadium, now known as the QSAC.
Which will be almost 50 years to the day of the Commonwealth Games.
And maybe that's a question for you, Mr. Quirk, because you did actually look at the QSAC option in the review, and not only did you say it wasn't a great, you actually pointed out in great detail why it is not a great decision.
Yeah, Chris, that's right. I mean, there's a number of factors, and because it had been raised, obviously, by John Coates, we wanted to give it justice and have a good look at it. But, you know, the biggest killer out there is terrain. All the facilities that are there, they are 50 years old, really solid grandstand there at the moment. But 1982 is a different era to what will be 2032. And so a 50-year gap in community expectations, community standards for disability access and everything else, that means that grandstand will have to go. With it will go what is some very sophisticated gear underneath, where all of our elite athletes use right now.
The Queensland Academy of Sport.
The Queensland Academy of Sport.
Will have to be bulldozed.
It will be.
But there is a fantastic gym space under there that's not only used by
We've both been there to have a look. It's an amazing space.
Well, there you go. So not just athletes, track and field, but also swimmers and every other
rowers,
discipline.
everything.
All the disciplines, yeah. So they're going to have to find a new home. Now, is that insurmountable? Well, no, it's not. It wasn't a showstopper. But for us, 600 million for a new grandstand. You've got then another billion because of the terrain. So you've got this situation where you've got a very significant geographical drop down to Mains Road at one end and to Griffith Uni on the other side. And the overlays that are required, much different from a Commonwealth Games to an Olympics in terms of all of the expectations. And so...
Hang on. A Commonwealth Games is not as big as an Olympics. Has anyone told the state government?
No.
It feels like they're sort of saying, well, we did GC 2018, we've got this.
Yeah, and that's the thing.
That's exactly what's being said.
Yeah, it is. And so the transport arrangements will mean you're going to have to clear probably some land in Griffith University as well, which... You know, some of the environmental students might get hopping on that one, but it was just the legacy factor. What do you do with it afterwards? Sure, it'll be the home of Australian athletics, but there's already 2 synthetic tracks there. It's already used by our local elite sports people.
Correct.
And what other benefits? Well, you can perhaps do some basketball courts on the concrete slabs that'll be created. And that'll be it. And what we were about was looking at broader community benefits that would be derived from a spend of that sort.
Have you spoken to the Premier in the last 24 hours?
No.
I have. I spent half an hour on the phone with him last night, Graham, where he tried to convince me that... and convincing is the word. He said he didn't think he'd win me over, but he wanted to at least explain what's happening at Nathan and try to convince me this is a great legacy for track and field. And what I explained to him is that there's no legacy for track and field at Nathan. The extent of what athletics can achieve at Nathan is already at Nathan. There's two significant training facilities there. It's a good hub for the Queensland Academy of Sport. There's a centre of excellence on the hill there as well. That's what it is, and that's as much as it will ever be. I think he was almost unaware of the displacement of the Queensland Academy of Sport, which I know you said wasn't a game breaker in relation to that, but that is a huge thing. The displacement of the Queensland Academy of Sport, you can't just relocate the technology they have. in the lead up to a home Olympics for a couple of years. I mean, and you're also displacing over whatever
and just say not just track and field athletes. This is the Queensland Academy of Sport. This is the equivalent of the AIS for Queensland athletes and a whole lot of visiting athletes from other states.
This is the home to, at times in Olympic history, the majority of our medals, Australia's medals, the Queensland Academy of Sport, one of the great provincial sports
knock it down. You guys can operate from that little demountable shed over there for a couple of years.
And that's the other point is too, when I said this on the Nova radio show today, everyone's going, no, it's okay. It's going to save us money. We're building a stadium out at QE2. There's no stadium being built. It's a Western grandstand, and then we're knocking down demountables and we're building new temporary grandstands.
Yeah, well, that's absolutely right.
It is the, and I said this to the Premier last night in a phone call. I said, it's the Olympic Games. It's been the biggest sporting event in the world for over 100 years. You can't have that. You can't have demountables.
I knew this would be a good episode.
And aluminium constructions for 4 weeks for the Olympic Games. It's
the best episode of Utopia yet. That's what it is.
You couldn't write it. You couldn't write it.
Well,
I mean, but you made sense of it, Graham. Like you made sense of it, and for me, that was when I saw that review come out, and you were like, you put a line through it for a blissful couple of hours. I was like, well, finally, common sense is prevailing, and it lasted a couple of hours, and then it went completely the other way, and I just can't make any. I don't understand it. I don't understand where he's coming from, and I also don't understand where John Coates is coming from, and I don't understand why he would even want to buy in on this.
Yeah, well, I mean, all of those things are interesting questions.
I mean, I'm not even sure there was a question there, Graham, but I mean, this has been my mindset, and it's frustrating. And you took a team of experts and come up with a review, so it's that against a bunch of politicians who, again, as I said yesterday, have almost zero sport or events acumen. And I'm sorry, they just don't. There's no passion there. And the worst thing is we keep expecting our politicians to grow this passion or grow this knowledge by themselves. And Sebastian Coe said this, and we're saying it again now. What you did was you went, because we got some genius people in our local community that you reached out to decide what the best way forward is. That's what you did. That's what the review was. You went to experts. On the other hand, the decisions that has been made has been a politician and some public servants. And you know what? There's some great public servants out there, but public servants aren't supposed to run an Olympic Games. They're not supposed to make decisions on venues for Olympic Games.
This is Toward the Games with Chris Jones and Graham Quirk and our special guest, David Luttrell. Today we'll be back with more in a moment. Welcome back.
Toward the Games. Toward the Games.
Who's running this thing?
2032. I've had a Valium.
I thought I muted you. Where's that button?
I'm turning mine on. Have a chat with Quirky for a bit. Go on, Chris.
Graham Quirk, you've just spent the last 2 months doing a review into what we should actually do in terms of the games, and what you came up with was a brand new stadium at Victoria Park instead of at the Gabba. Why is it that you think, you've concluded this is a better option?
Well, Chris, the reason we came to that conclusion, there was a number of findings that led us to that recommendation. And primarily the Gabba, we saw it as a stadium that is going to reach its end of life pretty soon. There's a report the state government has that says it's over for the Gabba in 2030. Now, sure, you can spend $1 billion and get it a bit more code compliant and do some things there, but you've still got the same back of house disaster that the Gabba is for staff, for, things like you can't get an ambulance on the field, someone comes off in a medicab, you can't actually take them to the medical rooms in the medicab. They've got to then be shifted from that. And then, of course, if at the end of the game, if you're a able-bodied kid, well, you can run onto the field. If you're a kid in a wheelchair, or whatever, you can't. You've got no access to the field of play.
And the other interesting point that you make in the review, which I hadn't realised before, is that the building itself, the structure itself, is not compliant with modern building code. So as soon as you get a hammer out and go bang, it's going to cost you. It's like tens millions of dollars because you got to do the whole. Then you got to bring everything back up to standard.
Yeah, that's right.
So you can't just do a little bit.
You can't. Well, that's the problem. You see, the building code has changed enormously since the Gabba was last upgraded. And so I'll give you a classic example. If you replace the shades, the shade cloth on top,
which is about to fall off anyway, right?
Which is ready for replacement. Yeah. That's right. As soon as you do that, you say, "Oh, we'll just go and do it." But the structures attaching or to which the shade cloth is attached also now have to be replaced because they do not meet the Australian building code anymore. So one expense leads to another expense and so forth. Even a full rebuild, as was originally proposed, will not give you a Tier 1 stadium in Australia. Because of limitation of space, you're still going to have the same back-of-house problems because of the limitations. So that's why we said, well, this is a bit silly. You wouldn't do a full rebuild.
It's also going to cost more than $2.7 billion.
Yeah,
you found.
That's right. Yeah, that was a February 2023 figure, and if you update that now, about $3 billion to the current building construction costs. So when we looked at that, you still don't have a Tier 1 stadium. We said, well, let's do something where we can be up there with competing with the best in Australia. Tier 1 stadium, much more commercial return because you can do better corporate spaces and those things in a Victoria Park option. And so for us, that was the best value for money, the best spend. And the other thing is you can then have a smooth transition for AFL and cricket from the Gabba to the new stadium. You do the Gabba, you would be up for compensation costs. We believe between about 185 and 360 million. It would be somewhere in that range for cricket and AFL for the dislocation for the period of the Gabba rebuild.
So you're talking my journalist maths. That's coming up to 3.4 billion.
Yeah, well,
if you're going to do the Gabba, at 3 billion.
Yep.
400 million up to 300 or 400 million for the displacement and all that sort of other stuff. Plus,
correct.
Plus. So you've got 3.4 billion in the kitty to play with. So then you started to cast your mind around. You spoke to a bucket load of people. You took 900 submissions. You've spent a lot. You've visited every venue, every option, and you concluded that the best option then, if you have that 3.4 billion, is to build an entirely new stadium.
Yeah.
At Victoria Park. Why did you choose Victoria Park?
Well, because it had the space around it. Every major Tier 1 oval stadium in Australia is built on a park.
Like natural ventilation around it.
Well, you've got that, and you've got the space for people movement as well.
Yeah.
Exactly. And plus, Victoria Park had some terrific advantages because you've got Cross River Rail Exhibition Station, you've got the Hurston Brisbane Metro Station, the Kelvin Grove Brisbane Metro Station, Royal Brisbane Hospital Brisbane Metro Station. So there was lots of options there. And also you've got car parking opportunities at the RNA Showground. So it had a lot to offer. And we believed that there was a site that was already disturbed, car park and low-level structures around the golf club there that would have been a great opportunity.
And so it's not a green space issue because you'll be using up some of the green space if it did go ahead?
It's already zoned sport and rec, okay, but we're talking here about disturbed land in the main. So that would be our preferred siting as a panel.
Yeah.
And also at this point, a reminder that this sacred green space we're talking about was a golf course 3 years ago. And no one's ever been there anyway. And so it's actually creating more green space than did exist in Brisbane, even with a stadium.
I think I suggested to you yesterday, Luttsy, we should go down there this weekend and have a look. I bet you there's not going to be a lot of people promenading around the green space.
Well, I'll tell you what, even when I promenaded playing golf there in years gone by, I didn't promenade without the use of a golf buggy because it's like climbing Mount Kilimanjaro. For starters, I mean, just that alone. I mean, I get it's a beautiful space, but I just don't see the. I saw a press release from Grace saying she refuses to neglect people or to deny people of this magnificent green space by building a stadium. I don't see the logic in that because there isn't any logic in that. There just isn't. I don't know what she's talking about.
Well, other than that, the council is planning or does have a long-term plan to turn it into a large park.
What electorate is it in? State.
It still would be Grace Grace's.
Is it?
Oh my God!
Is it?
Really?
I did not know that. Okay. I'll also at this point...
Actually, that is a good point on politics. Graham
Of course
Quirk,
it is.
it's easy for you to make this recommendation because you're not in politics anymore. You're not chasing a vote. You're making a recommendation based on logic. Oh my God.
Heaven forbid.
If you were still in council, if you were still an elected politician, would you have made the same recommendation? Because you know that the you were saying about your social media comments as you've posted these things. A lot of people are saying, well, we can't do a stadium because we need to, there's a cost of living crisis, homelessness, health crisis, all this other stuff. And so people, there's always that tension between spending on this and spending on that. If you were still an elected politician, would you have made the same recommendation?
Chris, I was only saying to the panel the other day, when I was in City Hall as Lord Mayor, I always used to say to my team, if you make the right decision, if you do it for the right reasons, if you get your narrative around it as to why that is the right thing to do, the politics will always look after itself. And that was always my view, that you've got to build up a trust with people, and if you do that, people might not agree with the decision, but they'll respect it. And over time, I think, you can win the political day because you're doing the right thing and you're making the right decisions for the right reasons.
Just quickly, I was disappointed at the lack of vision, and vision's a strong word. I think it was quoting your newspaper this morning. No vision, basically no guts, is what either you wrote or one of your staff wrote today.
That was me, but yes.
Was that you?
Yeah.
Well, was well said.
Thank you, David.
One of the disappointing things that I've taken from the Premier in the last 24 hours is pretty much the idea that Victoria Park was essentially going to be an AFL stadium that Brisbane doesn't need or isn't ready for just an new AFL stadium. And again, that's just not right. Like, it just doesn't, like, the fact that there's no vision in him to be able to have awareness of what that facility could bring to Brisbane across, well, not just AFL. Look at Optus Stadium in Perth. Like, it received some backlash initially. No one is saying anything bad about Optus Stadium,
including Coldplay.
Yes, including Coldplay, who came there here for one concert. I haven't heard the Wacker mentioned. And there's going to be people going, oh, it's tradition or whatever. Well, if you're that worried about the Gabba tradition, leave the middle of whatever they repurpose it as, leave the bit of grass in the middle so kids can play soccer on there in the tradition of Bradman and all these great people that once played. I mean, that's
a really good point, Luttsy, because this was one of our findings also at the Gabba. It's advertised as a 42,000-seat stadium, but it can only do 37 for AFL, it can only do 33 for cricket.
Yep.
So, and AFL, the Lions, sure, a successful run at the moment, but they've filled that on multiple occasions last year. They had to deny people the opportunity to go. So that's the other really important reason why you would build a bigger stadium, to give people an opportunity to turn up to these events.
And the Perth Stadium's also a great example from history of exactly what you're talking about. No matter how controversial stadiums and things are at the start, they always are. Yeah. The moment it's open, everyone wants a ticket and everyone's proud of it. And the Perth Stadium Colin Barnett was the Premier, and Liberal Premier, and he was the opposition at the time was led by Mark McGowan, and there was a big controversy over where it should be. It's very similar to the Gabba v Victoria Park option. Mark McGowan wanted it. He's a Freo fan. He wanted it near Subiaco Oval, thought it would have better access, all that sort of stuff, rather than this greenfield site that was, I think it was a golf course even. The parallels are there. By the time it was actually built, Colin Barnett, who had pushed against the opposition and all that criticism to get this thing built, the Premier was then Mark McGowan, who had inherited it. And I quoted him in that editorial you referred to. Basically, on the opening, Mark McGowan says, "This is the greatest thing ever for our sport-loving city. Everyone's going to love it. It's a great thing."
Jeff Kennett admitted at John Cain's funeral, I believe, that he was wrong in what was
for Melbourne Park,
which is one of the great sporting precincts in the entire world. Just before we go to a break, one other thing that if you were to ask the Premier right now about the amount of people that enjoy stadiums, he would give you a stat about the Gabba and Suncorp Stadium saying that only 10% of Brisbane enjoy these stadiums. And I think, again, that lacks vision. To think that in his mind, he's thinking that only 10% of people in Brisbane, ask him, go to the Gabba and Suncorp Stadium. So therefore, there's another 90% who couldn't care less about it, which I think is completely backward in our thinking.
Well, by that logic, we should close every hospital because only a few percent of people turn up to every hospital. That doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, 0.2% of Sydney went to Taylor Swift. It was still a significant thing to have her in Sydney. And then there's television audiences watching us at these stadiums. That's just such a superficial, shallow way to look at it.
Yeah.
Without any vision for the future of Brisbane.
Well, and I think in the Melbourne concert, it was a $1 billion economic generator, the Taylor Swift concert there. So that's the sort of things that these things do for cities.
Just to maybe if we park the stadium.
Yep.
The other big recommendation you made was relating to Brisbane Live, the Brisbane Arena, the indoor venue, to replace Boondall Entertainment Centre, to bring it into the inner city. Great idea. It was going to be built over the rail lines at Roma Street,
correct?
Which will be it'll be the biggest station in terms of throughput when Cross River Rail happens. You've recommended it go ahead, but it move somewhere else.
Yeah, that's right, Chris. Look, there's no doubt that the preferred site would have been over rail in Roma Street, premier site. But there were a number of factors that drove our recommendation. The first one was it was going to cost somewhere between $4 and $5 billion. The second one was 40% of rail services through that site were going to have to close for more than 2 years. That would have meant about 200 buses would have to have been engaged to transport those people for that period of time. There was also, when we discussed it with constructors, no certainty it was going to be done by 2032. It had a program to 2031. But there were several risk factors, and it would have only have taken one delay in one of those risk factors, and she'd have been all over Red Rover.
That wouldn't be ideal, would it?
So there were multiple reasons.
Back to Chandler.
That's right. So multiple reasons why we said 500 metres to the north. You still get the benefit of Cross River Rail and Brisbane Metro services, still city centre.
It's still, you can still link it to Suncorp and in Caxton Street and the city. Like it's still that, the talk of that green arbour, whatever they're calling that. What were they calling that? That connection, that pedestrian connection.
Yeah, which should still happen.
Which should still happen, even in that place. It's still not that far away.
No, absolutely right.
My friends who own the Normby Hotel be very happy as well.
Yeah, good shout out.
Across the road.
It's got you some free drinks, hasn't it? Well done.
But yeah.
But that little corner, it's currently a car park, it's a few council sheds and so on.
That's right. Yeah, it's exactly right. So
it's not being used.
Disturbed space. Yeah. And but we think that's, as I say, the premier site would have been down in Roma Street, but
you can't get it to work.
$4 to $5 billion. No, we just.
And so then you'd get off the train at Roma Street, and similar to how you walk up to Suncorp now, past the barracks, you just sort of go the other way up through the parkland.
That's right. Exactly right. Improved pathway.
Is it about the same distance as Suncorp is?
Oh, I think it'd be even closer. Yeah,
right.
It's only about 400 to 500 metres.
So it works.
It does.
That still works. Still have the benefit of being come along. I assume a new pathway.
There'd be a new pathway and probably a new road connection as well into that section. It might be just a dedicated road into there, but to make the facility functional and all of that.
And that has been green lighted.
That's the forgotten tick of the review. We're getting overshadowed by this other huge thing over here. But the Brisbane Live, honestly,
that's a game changer for the city.
Yeah, 100%. And given what has happened with Nathan, I'm taking this as a massive win because it could have come off Nathan and gone, you know what, Brisbane Live's going to be Yatla Live. And that's not even a stupid thing, given what happened with Nathan. So I'm taking somewhere in Roma Street, this magnificent, which should be a magnificent stadium. I don't know who's going to build the thing. Yeah. I don't know if Harvey's doing that. Whoever ends up doing that, that should be a centrepiece of the city.
And the good thing is it'll be paid for by the federal government.
Hallelujah.
$2.5 billion is the price tag of the new one rather than the $4 billion.
Geez, haven't they been quiet last 24 hours? Arnica! She listens. Arnica! We'll take a break and come back. Toward the Games, Brisbane 2032, Luttsy, Chris Jones, and
Loving this conversation, Luttsy.
Special guest.
Loving it.
Graham Quirk, trying to put some logic in an illogical situation. Politics seems like it's gotten the better of the Olympics over the last 24 hours. The athletics is going to Nathan. There's 27 of the 30 of Graham's review recommendations have been taken up. Brisbane Live at Roma Street, somewhere at Roma Street. That's a big tick. But politics seems to have gotten the better of us, which takes me back to one of our earliest podcasts. And it was a podcast that took place with Sebastian Coe in March 2023. Sebastian Coe, of course, was the guy that put together the London Games in 2012.
Massive success.
Somewhat successfully,
Yes.
You would argue. You'd say it was the best games, at least in Sydney. And he spoke about the importance of, bipartisan, I think it's tripartisan, as far as he was concerned in the London political model throughout that process leading up to the Games, and how important it was that politics did not play a significant role in that process, and how the success of the Games was based on political, or not becoming political, and political parties coming together for the greater good.
When you're delivering a Games, you have to, the real art is to remain, it is to be politically neutral and to make sure that government is on board. Obviously, you need them, but actually that you have opposition as well. So, the Olympic board was actually made up of the Secretary of State. I was on that board. This was a very small board, the chair of the infrastructural organisation, but also the opposition spokesmen and women. And in fact, that was a good thing, because when inevitably, political landscape changed, opposition spokesmen became well-briefed ministers, and ministers that went out became responsible opposition spokesmen. For instance, Tessa Jowell, an absolute superstar in Blair's government in helping us to deliver that. 2 years before the Games, Labour lose the election, but we made sure she remained on the board, was supportive, and actually helped shape and advise incoming ministers. So when we were bidding, the same, I managed to get into all three political party manifestos, Conservative, Labour and Liberal Democrats, exactly the same 2 paragraphs in each of those manifestos, because I knew that the risk would be that when political pressure was on, when you're in peacetime, everybody's cosy and happy, but as soon as you end up in a challenging political landscape, then there's a risk that politicians become tribal.
Yeah, Seb Coe makes a lot of sense. And this is how it has traditionally been. All of the parties, in terms of political parties, community, you get as many allies on board as you can, and all head in one direction to the overall benefit of that city, that region, that state, in this case, that's doing the Games. So we met with Seb Coe back as a council of mayors of South East Queensland in 2015, and we wanted that meeting, and he was in Brisbane, and we grabbed him because, we wanted to understand clearly what the legacy opportunities were. And he said to us at the time, that London got a 1.5% shift upwards in employment. They used the opportunity for urban renewal of the city in areas that needed upgrades. This was a world city that was, a household name across the world. And yet they were able to get significant legacy benefits. And that's why we said, well, if they can do that, imagine how greater that would be for a city like Brisbane and a region of southeast Queensland, where we're not well known around
we're still
the world.
emerging.
Exactly. So, but what Seb says about getting everybody with the program is absolutely right. And that somehow on this journey, we've got to get back to that point.
Instead, we have a situation where the opposition says, should it be successful at the October election, it'll essentially do another review.
Well, that's good news for you, Graham. You're the winner out of all this.
I don't know about that. But anyway, I just...
But the clock's ticking now. Because, and then we had Andrew Liveris on only whenever that was. It wasn't that long ago saying, okay, this review, we must have had him on just as the review was announced. And he said, okay, the line in the sand moment is now. We've got to draw a line and say, this is, from now on, this is where we start making... Well, the decisions have to be made and we have to start acting on them.
Yeah, exactly. And when we made that point in the review too, it's crunch time. You've got to get on with it and build this stuff. Because the other reality is that there's so much pressure in the construction and building sector out there, and you've only got to do something around your own home to know what prices are like, both materials and labour.
Yep.
And it's in the big infrastructure, it's exactly the same. So the longer these things drift along, the more expensive it's going to be.
I spoke to a guy that won't even say who it was, but it was a major developer, had 6 high-rise developments in the works at the moment. All of them have clearance and all the codes and everything like that to go ahead. 2 of them are sold out. Can't find a builder to build one of them at the moment. Yeah. He said what did take 2 years now takes 3 years, and he's saying what did cost $800,000 now costs $1.2 million for a 2-bedroom apartment. And we're talking that scale.
Yeah.
So there's a real urgency. You watch. I mean, it's undeniable that in 5-6 years' time there's going to be a holy crap. Are we going to get this done?
Yes.
How is that avoidable?
And on a lot of work sites now, the deal is you only work 5 days a fortnight as well. So anyway. Now, there were a whole lot of other recommendations. I thought it would be worthwhile spending the last 10 minutes or so, Graham, going through the other recommendations, because there's been so much conversation correctly about the stadium and about Brisbane Arena, but there's a whole lot of other decisions that you have green-lighted here, having reviewed them, and the government's agreed. And the first you got indoor sports centres, then you got the Sleeman Sports Complex, rowing and canoe venues, regional stadiums, and some other bits and pieces. So starting with indoor sports centres, you have the main recommendation here is to not proceed with the construction of an indoor sports centre at the Albion Park Raceway site. Why is that?
Well, I had to remove myself from conversation around this because I'm on the board of Racing Queensland. But I at the end of the investigation, the panel advised me that they just couldn't make it work there. They felt, again, that there was some restrictions in terms of the site, poor access. And so what they've recommended in its place, however, is one for the north side and either be at Boondall, around where the entertainment centre is now. There's some land allocated there for expansion, and also a site at Zilmere. And I'm pretty familiar with both of those sites, and both would work very, very well. So that was that one. And then there were others that were recommended, Chris, at Moreton Bay, a region, which we have recommended is expanded in size because you cannot have enough indoor sports facilities out there in the suburbs. There is just so much underlying demand for junior sport.
It's legacy too, right? Like you can have some events in it, whatever.
So these would be Olympic venues or just...
They'll be Olympic venues,
okay,
but they could be used beforehand. I'm sure they will be used beforehand and obviously afterwards. So great legacy for junior sport. One at Logan we've recommended, and we've also recommended...
The Jim Chalmers facility. Yep.
Well, it's but look, all that aside, it is still an area that it is in need, and we inspected the site and we thought it would work extremely well. Good transport connections, and similarly at Chandler, there's a indoor facility there which will have a legacy as well.
And that probably leads into the Sleeman Sports Complex. You made a series of recommendations relating to bits and pieces in that facility. Yeah,
well, again, great facilities. You've got, obviously, the Anna Centre there. You've got the velodrome. The velodrome, yeah, exactly. And the aquatic facilities. You've got BMX. And then there'll be this new indoor facility built as well. One of the findings we had there, though, there's going to be a lot going on, a lot of events. And, with different sessions of events, you're going to have a lot of people movement out there. So we've recommended that we look for some additional land close by there for, setting down of buses and the like, just to make the operations easier for the organising committee going forward.
Would the Metro get out there by 2032 for
I
that
doubt
purpose?
It at this stage, Chris. Yeah, I think it could, but that's a pretty big ask with all the other construction that's going to be going on.
Okay, and then rowing and canoe venues.
Yeah.
Our favourite, on the podcast, our favourite venue for 2032 is the Wyaralong Dam. And you've recommended that go ahead as the Flatwater Centre?
Look, we have. This was a really interesting one. We spent a lot of time on rowing and canoe facilities. So Wyaralong is our recommendation, but we've asked that they look, instead of the western side, to go to the eastern side. And we believe if that can work, and our initial investigation shows that it would, it'll save about 40 million.
Okay.
So that's...
Why is that? What's the saving from?
Well, because at the moment you've got to build a dedicated new road of 4.5 kilometres, which is going to be used and not much used for it afterwards. Yeah. So
if you're heading down there post-Olympics, you're up to no good.
Well, it's a very quiet spot.
That's a beautiful road.
Okay.
With views.
So zero legacy for that. Okay.
So that was...
Is that out past by desert? Is that where it is?
Well, it's to the. I describe it to the. Yes, it's near Bay Desert, but it's also to the east of sort of Kalbar, or to the west of Kalbar, I should say. So, we did have a very close look at Lake Kawongbar, which is where Rowing Queensland wanted to go. So their headquarters at the moment is at Wyaralong, but they were keen for Kawongbar. We just couldn't recommend it in the end because of the environmental issues. They'd have to lose a lot of koala land and so forth.
Now, everyone's favourite Olympian, Jessica Fox, needs a whitewater centre, and there has been some suggestion as this debate's gone on that instead of at Redland, we should just use the existing facility at Penrith in Sydney, sharing our games with the good people of New South Wales. That'll work well. But fortunately, you have recommended that Redland Whitewater Centre go ahead?
Yeah, I have. And our first finding was that the Penrith facility closes at that time of year every year as well. And why is that? Well, bad weather conditions essentially down there. Near the Blue Mountains and all of that. So they sensibly close it for a couple of months.
And it's around the Panthers. It's around the Panthers Mad Monday as well. So that would be a disaster.
But
even that's the easiest recommendation ever, isn't it? Well, we can't do it there because it's closed.
Yes.
But all that to one side. I mean, the one at Redlands had a lot to recommend it, and
was that a tick in the review?
Yeah, it was.
Okay.
Well, we went out and had a look at it because there was people raising environmental concerns. We had a good look at the site where they intended to do all the construction, and we satisfied ourselves that it was fine as a site, but also, I mean, it can become the home of training for state emergency services, for Queensland Life Saving.
Who currently go to Penrith, do they to train?
They do.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. So, I mean, that'll add a
legacy.
revenue stream to the facility. The council are prepared to take it on as an ongoing proposition.
Yeah, well, there's a new mayor there who has a slightly different view, but I'm sure it can be negotiated.
We'll wait and see how that plays out.
Regional stadium, Sunshine Coast Stadium upgrade, you've given a tick to. Barlow Park and Cairns upgrade, you've given a tick to.
Yeah.
But the Toowoomba Sports Ground proposed upgrades, you have said no.
Limited legacy.
Yeah, this one hurt a bit because Toowoomba have been very strong supporters of the games right from the outset in 2015 through Mayor Paul Antonio. But, you know, the thing with it was they just couldn't outline a legacy. There was just, we asked and asked around that, what were you going to do with it post-games, and we just couldn't satisfy ourselves. Spending more than 100 million at that facility was a good spend.
So what do the people of Toowoomba then end up getting out of having the games other than get to drive down the highway to other venues?
Nathan.
Well, no, well, what
you can get on the freeway pretty quickly from Nathan.
Actually, Nathan's very
convenient
for people. Yeah.
Well, as it turns out now, they will struggle to get anything up there. We had thought that if, Victoria Park option went ahead, cross country needed to be moved, equestrian would have had to have been moved, and Toowoomba provided a perfect location in our view. You've got the international airport there. They want a quarantine facility. They've got plenty of accommodation there at Wellcamp. And then, the facilities on site at the showgrounds, they've got 400 stables. They've got tremendous training facilities. You've got a volunteer corps in the centre of horse country in Queensland, in Toowoomba. So it just all made sense to us.
Okay. The last two in terms of venues is making sure that the tennis centre at Tennyson is fine to have the Olympic and I assume Paralympic tennis, and then the Sunshine Coast Mountain Bike Centre tick. The last two recommendations you make, one is that the Queensland Government works with the organising committee to confirm sports as early as possible, and Andrew Liveris went through that on the last, when he was last on the podcast 2 episodes ago, talking about the timing of that and so on. So that's an interesting point. But the last recommendation you make that I wouldn't mind you just explaining, it says, the Queensland Government considers a multi-track approach to project development and considers a delivery partner approach to procurement and delivery. What are you actually saying there?
Yeah, look, this recommendation was driven by a guy called Ken Konofsky, who is our infrastructure expert on the panel. So we had an Olympics background person and sports venue person. That was Michelle Morris, who's Melbourne based, but both of them know Brisbane extremely well. In fact, Ken worked on Brisbane City Council and Cairns Council in his early years. His idea around this was to make sure that you've got the apparatus to get on and do things quickly. By having partners, you've got the capacity to be able to keep the thing moving, and it was about time saving, and time saving saves money.
Yep,
that's what it was about.
Okay.
So allowing the public servants, if you like, to have private sector people in there in the mix. And move through in a partnership arrangement.
Yeah, okay.
Is that because you're concerned if things get lost in the bureaucracy that they tend to not come out in a sufficient time frame?
Every day that I was there, I had this statement, and I said it virtually every day. I said, if you continue to do a business as usual approach, you will not make it in 2032. This is why the authority is so critical. There's got to be pushed through. You cannot do business as usual.
So explain it with the authority what the chain of command will be coming down.
Well, I haven't seen the legislation. It doesn't need to be very big legislation. I think the legislation in London was 3 pages. What it does, it has to give powers.
Ask Sebco.
well, and get on with it. And that's essentially what the authority is about, is to cut through the normal processes of government and get the bill done. Yeah. And
that's that point. And I was half joking before, but I kind of wasn't as well, that the Olympics is the equivalent of putting on every single day of an Olympic Games.
Yep.
I know we're going to have the Paralympics as well, but Olympic Games is the equivalent of putting on 7 Super Bowls.
Yeah.
This is not Gold Coast 2018, 14 years on. This is a totally different scale. It's multiples of.
Multiplied by 6. It's multiplied by 6. That's the equation we were given by the International Olympic Committee.
You can't just treat this as, just something that the public service will deliver, because it's like nothing we've ever seen before.
And that's I think the most frustrating thing for me. And you can't expect when people, when they're saying, we've gone out to the people of Queensland and they've told us this. Well, if you haven't communicated to the people of Queensland what on earth's happening, which hasn't happened, no one knows what it is. But the majority of people don't have any scale, any concept of scale of what the Olympic Games is or what it means in a global sense on every single level, from tourism to everything. If they don't understand it, how can you expect them to have an opinion of it or an opinion that means anything? So when I get frustrated at comments I get around, what are we doing this for when we should be doing this, and trying to explain that these are different budgets and this has already been budgeted and things like that, then how can we expect people to know what's going on if no one's communicated it to them?
And you've got to take a very complex set of arrangements and just turn it into lounge room language and take people on the journey. And one of the things with this report, I have tried to get the language in such a form that everybody can understand through the findings why we made the recommendations we did.
And it is a public report. You can read it. I read it on Sunday. Unfortunately, got a heads up ahead of the release. It's excellent. It's very easy to go through. And if you read that report, you have a very good sense of the challenge and the opportunity and and why you've come up with these recommendations. I think, just as a final thought, if you read the people who leave comments on our website, there is that sense that you found with your social media posts that people are saying, oh, why do we need an Olympic? It's the wrong question. The question is not, do we need a stadium? The question is, where should we put the stadium? And we asked our readers that question on the website. The same readers who are saying 70% said Victoria Park.
Wow.
10% Gabba and the remainder were Cusack. It is the best option when you ask people the right question.
Yes.
Yeah. And the other thing that people need to remember is that the expenditure relating to all of the sporting venues, all of them, is half of 1% of the revenue raised by the state over the next 8 years. So it is... It's
nothing. It's also 1/3 of the additional money that the Treasurer has taken from mining companies in this year alone. Additional in this year alone. 1/3. What? It's nothing. It's less than they're spending on Copper String, connecting Mount Isa to the power grid better.
Right.
Graham, we're out of time, mate. Well, Graham's had his shot, and hopefully we haven't heard the last of you because, again, you've made sense of things that ain't making sense right now. A lot of people who listen to this podcast are very powerful and important people that can make an influence. I would suggest to you that now is the time to use your voice, if you can do so, and let's make sure we get this back on the rails. Graham, thank you so much for your time, mate.
Thank you, Luttsy.
I dare say you'll be the first ever 3-timer on this podcast because you just keep sprouting wisdom.
Nice to be with you.
Jonesy, you so not so much, but we don't get paid, so we just whatever. Yep.